Sean, are you're the affirmative, is that right? Okay. And remember, we're focusing especially on structure and concepts.
I'll label my parts.
Excellent. Kory, you don't have an E in your name, right?
No,
Okay, I apologize if I've ever done that.
you're fine.
Okay.
Let it be resolved, the United States federal government should increase regulations on the development, use, and distribution of GMOs. Inherency, the current federal government regulations of GMOs are not sufficient. Charles W. Schmidt, Environmental Health Perspectives, 2005. U.S. regulatory agencies demand only that agrobiotech companies demonstrate a GM crop shares equivalent composition and nutritional status to its conventional counterpart. If it meets these criteria, the crop is considered as safe as conventional variety and companies are free to sell. Long-term impacts of our environment and human health are not considered, which is a great cause for alarm, given the evidence of GMO crops and the practices they require negatively impact our health, environment, and economy and planet. I call upon Congress to gradually restrict the sale of GMOs and draft legislation to increase appropriations and regulatory enforcement capabilities of regulatory agencies. These agencies, including but not limited to the FDA, EPA, and USDA, will subsequently enforce greater restrictions on the use and distribution of GMO products. This plan will enable us to mitigate the long-term consequences of GMO production, pest resistance, excessive application of pesticides and fertilizers, and allow American exporters to ship agricultural commodities to more markets. Advantage 1. Lack of regulation allows GMO crops to increase mutations of pesticide resistance, defeating the purpose of GMO use. Mu et al. 1995, a survey of the resistance of the cotton bollworm, Department of Plant Protection, Shandong Agricultural University. The result obtained showed that in areas of China where a large amount of parathenoid insecticides were applied, resistance of cotton bollworm reached as high as 70-fold increase in 1990 and 400-fold increase in 1993 in Shandong province. Resistance of cotton bollworm to monocrotophos reached as high as 12.7-fold in 1990 in Zhejiang province and 16.6-fold increase in 1993 in the Liaoqing of Shandong province. Solvency. By increasing regulations on and restricting GMO production, we can mitigate pest resistance, preventing reduced yields caused by resistant pests. Dr. Jeff Gonzalez, University of Minnesota, October 2004, genetically engineered crops and pesticide use in the United States found that herbicide resistance is a direct result of the lack of diversification in weed management. Impact: continuing the use of GMO crops and pesticide fertilizers they require, pests such as insects and bacteria will continue to mutate and increase resistance, causing the need for more or different pesticides. This is exactly what Monsanto wants as they produce fertilizers and pesticides. Advantage 2. Contrary to Monsanto and GMO apologist claims, GMO crops do not reduce pesticide fertilizer use. My plan would reduce pesticide fertilizer use and therefore the amount of pesticide and fertilizer present in our ecosystem and our diet. Maxwell, 2014, Understanding Environmental Health. Overapplication of fertilizers has led to algae blooms resulting from runoff rich in nitrates, the active component of many fertilizers, sucking nitrogen out of the water, causing fish kills. Nitrates also harm human health when runoff enters drinking water, as it has caused methemoglobinemia, or baby blue syndrome. Hemoglobin in the bloodstream is prevented from carrying the adequate oxygen, turning babies blue and sometimes causing death. Overapplication of pesticides kills off weak pests while allowing resistant pests to pass on genes. At the same time, massive pest population reduction also kills off the main predators of the pest, which can lead to a secondary outbreak in conjunction of the fact that pets that have a mane will be stronger. Again, we see GMO crops defeating their purpose, causing greater pests instead of fewer. Gill et al. 2012. Combined pesticide exposure severely affects the individual and colony level traits in bees. Further unintended consequences of GMO crops include pesticides harming non-target insects that can harbor resistance. Bees are responsible for roughly 80% of insect pollination, which they do for farmers for free. Quoting Gill, here we show that the chronic exposure of bumblebees to 2 pesticides at concentrations that approximate field level exposure impairs the natural foraging behavior and increases worker mortality, leading to significant reductions in brood development and colony success. We found that the worker foraging performance, particularly collecting efficiency, was significantly reduced. Moreover, we provide evidence that combinatorial exposure to pesticides increases the propensity for colonies to fail. Dr. Chuck Benbrook, University of Washington, PhD, 2004, genetically engineered crops and pesticide use in the United States. Pesticide reduction claims by GMO proponents have not materialized. Since 1990, the application recommendation of herbicide glyphosate have increased 50 to 200% depending on the weed. Solvency, by increasing regulations and restricting GMO production, we can reduce fertilizer and pesticide use and return to traditional chemical-free farm practices. Dr. David Pinnamal at Oxford Bioscience Journal 142. Pesticide has not been reduced with the introduction of GMO crops. Pesticide has increased tenfold since the 1950s. It is never the intention of GMO producers or Monsanto, such as Monsanto, to reduce pesticide as they produce pesticides. Monsanto's Roundup being the most well-known impact. If regulations are not increasing the status quo of ever increasing pesticide fertilizer use and consequent pollution of soil, water, and air will continue. Advantage 3. Lack of stringent GMO regulation causes problems for American exporters. This is shown in that the presence of GMOs in American agricultural exports will make it more difficult. According to Sarah Lively, Northwestern University JD candidate. For example, in 1996, the U.S. exported $3 billion in genetically modified and conventional corn and soybeans to the European community. Due to the introduction of EC Directive 9220, these exports dropped to around $1 billion in 1999. Even if a GM export is approved by the Commission, European states can still make introduction of GM products to their individual markets more challenging. The problem is not isolated to just Europe, but also appears in China. According to Jacob Bungie, staff writer, Wall Street Journal, 2014, China repeatedly refused shipment of U.S. corn, saying officials detected some detected genocide modification developed by Syngenta that Beijing hasn't approved. U.S. grain industry group says that rejected shipments have come to nearly 1.4 million metric tons, and rejected shipments have cost grain companies $427 million from lost sales and reduced prices. Solvency, by increasing regulations and restricting GMO production, U.S. goods will be marketable, given the current ban on GMOs in Europe and some GMO bans in China. Impact if regulations are not increased, then the use in the agriculture will continue to pose potential export markets.
Process?
I'm going to stay standing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For part of your plan, you had mentioned that GMOs would be put into specific situations to determine what makes them safe. Could you expand more on what exactly makes them safe?
I don't understand the question.
What proves that a GMO is safe?
I never said that GMOs have to be proven safe. I said that they should be gradually restricted and phased out of the agricultural system.
Specifically, which one should be phased out?
Actually, all GMOs. That we should start with GMO crops that are based on human consumption. So that would be any like genetically modified tomatoes, onions, those kind of vegetables, and then we would phase out slowly the more common crops that are used for GMOs, such as corn and soybeans, which the vast majority of which don't go to people, they go to animals and cars.
Have you any evidence demonstrating the effects on human health they have in specific situations like tomatoes, you said?
No, I do not have that specific information.
Okay. Now, where exactly did you, is any funding involved in your plan?
Yes, Congress, as I said, Congress should increase appropriations and regulatory enforcement capabilities, so yes.
Okay, so that money comes out of the taxpayer?
Yeah, it would come from the taxpayer. It also come from Monsanto and the agricultural industry, money that would not be put into GMOs.
Okay, part of your inherency, one of the cards you use for your inherency from the environmental health perspectives, could you remind me a little bit about that background? Who's that author?
The author is a scholar. His name is Charles W. Smith, and he was writing in the peer-reviewed Environmental Health Perspectives in 2005.
Has he produced any work since then expanding on his research or further validating his claims?
Not to my knowledge, no. I can't fit any more research in my further case.
Okay, sure thing. Could you explain more on the link between the effects that the drinking water had on I think there was a case
Yes.
of blue babies that we produced?
Yes, exactly what happened. So basically, one of the main fertilizers that we use is called atrazine. It has a lot of nitrates in it. And nitrates can, basically over time, especially with young children or old people, they can prohibit the hemoglobin from transporting oxygen through the body, and that's why the babies will turn blue and sometimes die.
And that was a problem with the fertilizer, correct?
Correct.
That was not a problem with the GMOs?
The GMOs require those fertilizers because they are massive monocultures. You don't get GMOs without massive pesticide and fertilizer use.
And so there aren't any GMOs that have adapted to, or since then, or any biotech industries that have tried to adapt that herbicide into their product?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's fine.
So you want to use some prep time?
Could I have a minute and 30 seconds?
Minute? Thirty seconds used. One minute used. Ready?
I am. The problem associated with the plan has been offered is that the disadvantages of the problem do not exist. Firstly, the environmental risks. Studies on the environmental impact of technology take decades to do properly, and GMOs have not been prevalent long enough for their impact to be qualified environmentally. According to the International Service of Acquisition for Biotech Services in 2014, the article claims that the environmental safety of products of agricultural biotechnology, just as those created with classical breeding and mutation, have grown conventionally or organically, must be evaluated on a case-by-case basis to perform meaningful risk assessments. To generalize the environmental impacts of all GMOs in a wide range of settings is ineffective and unscientific. GMOs developed, or additionally, with GMOs developed with sustainable technologies can also be used to create positively environmentally friendly practices. Also from the acquisition of biotech services, the article claims that the GE organisms also contribute to sustainable practice by augmenting and replacing certain conventional practices. For example, plants can be created that increase water use and fertilizer efficiencies that remediate soil contaminants and increase no-till or low-till practices to help reduce greenhouse gases and produce higher land yields without increasing land usage. More extensive study about the impact of GMOs on gene flow is needed to establish correlations between these causational relationships. These anecdotal instances are providing suggestions that whether gene flow causes significant environmental impact or economic risks for conventional, organic, or GE crops required on a case-by-case evaluation. Additionally, there's even potential for GMOs to be environmentally friendly because they decrease the amount of pesticides used. Also from the acquisition of biotech services in 2013, one of the most significant environmental benefits of GM crops is the dramatic reduction in pesticide use, with the size of the reduction varying between crops and induced trait. Now, that is not the only disadvantage that the problem has posed. The problem also bases many of its claims off health risks, which also don't exist. Because GMOs are not harmful as publicized by the Food Safety News in 2014, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the American Medical Association, the World Health Organization, Health Canada, the United States Department of Agriculture, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and the National Academies of Science all find that genetically modified foods are safe and there are no negative health effects associated with their use. The absence of these known risks prevent effective regulations. From Martin Kwan from the Department of Agriculture Economics and Rural Development at George Austin University in Göttingen, 2009, unexpected risks have not been materialized so far, and those risks that do exist seem to be manageable. There has been evidence in GM technology that can contribute to the preservation of agri-biodiversity through seed banks. Because of the new traits inserted with the local heirloom varieties, these concerns will only lead to complex and costly biosafety, food safety, and labeling regulations. Also, the opinion of many respected national and international medical and scientific institutions to support the safety of GMOs. Technology author and blogger Ramez Nam lists the consensus of prestigious national and international bodies and institutions that proclaim GMOs as safe for human health. The largest survey on GMO safety also concludes that GMOs are safe. Alessandro Nicolia, biologist at the University of Perugia in Italy, examined over 1,000 research papers, reviewed relevant opinions, and reports published from 2002 to 2012. The review engages all aspects of GM crop safety from how the crops interact with the environment. Now, the most reasonable plan for us to continue is to continue with the status quo. The reason for that is because there are also a lot of negative impacts caused by his plan, caused by the affirmative plan. One of them being food security. The regulation of genetically modified organisms impedes rather than improves public health. Because malnutrition is one of the world's greatest problems, with millions of people dying each year because they don't have enough food, the lack of food, because GMO products increase crop yields, will have a profound impact on the world. This problem averts men, women, and as children who are the most visible victims of malnourishment. Now, in addition, the high cost of food already causes food insecurity for individuals and families across the U.S. According to C.C. Campbell, a professor at Cornell University, food insecurity is caused by a lack of accessibility to nutritionally adequate and safe foods and a lack of assured ability to acquire these foods in a socially acceptable way. Now, in addition, with mandatory GMO impacts on GMO regulation, the large-scale conventional farming is actually a better basis, or the large-scale conventional farming that we use today is actually better for producing the basis of our caloric intake. According to the Revkin of the New York Times, 2012, organic foods has been a lot of ground to make up in its major gains, especially staples like wheat and rice. But for delivering sheer calories, in our staple crops of wheat, rice, maize, soybeans, and so on, conventional farms have the advantage right now. And while we still have a lot of organic farming practices that are probably best deployed in fruit and vegetable farms, where growing nutrition is the primary goal, the calories associated with the GMO foods seem to have the best impact. Now, in addition, the plan proposed by the affirmative would also have a large impact on our consumers, because most Americans consume GMOs every day. According to the Journal of Integrative Plant Biology in 2014, Americans have been consuming GMOs for 17 years with no ill effects as far as we know. There are 4 GMO food crops that are widely grown and can be used as food and consumed as food. In addition to soybeans, maize, canola, and sugar beets, this also includes soft drinks and many bakery desserts. So, soy protein is used extensively to make sauces, such as maize starch, and sauces are present in many frozen prepared foods. Oil from canola are also present in a lot of foods. And Americans actually prefer these organic foods over the organic choices that the affirmative is making us not choose.
Okay. All right, process.
No. You indicated that for food insecurity, that organic is inferior to GM crops. Do you actually have a study that shows that, or is that just kind of general?
The argument made would not be one that says that organic foods are inferior. Actually, on a nutritional basis, organic foods like tomatoes, vegetables, other fruits are actually more nutritious than GMO foods. But for the argument of food security, the more important argument is to be made for the caloric intake. The calories associated with foods that come from primarily GMO crops, including corn, wheat, are ingested more on a daily basis than a lot of the nutritional foods that would have a better impact. If we were to
Okay, so
use our
basically you have no
roads-
study that shows that crop yields are higher for GM.
Actually, crop yields higher for GMOs. Yes, GMOs.
By how much?
We're significantly higher production crops are the 4 crops, soybeans, corn, cotton, canola. On the 111 million hectares planted with biocrops in 2007, were significantly higher than levels than would have been otherwise.
So no specific numbers, in other words.
101 million hectares would have been a statistically significant amount, according to Stuart
Still
Sandberg,
not hearing any solid
Cornell's
numbers.
professor. They were
How-
solid numbers.
How much has pesticide been reduced? You said that pesticide has been reduced. Do you know how much?
No, I cannot, or I don't believe I can affirm on any specific number. I can affirm that they have been decreased, yes.
Has any individual study demonstrated the absolute safety of GMOs for human health?
That would be impossible. There is no way to there's no way to actively prove that something is safe. If there were, that would actually go against the laws of science. The laws of science cannot prove a negative, so therefore nothing can be proved completely safe, which is why GMO regulation would make very little sense.
Have there been any studies that have shown that GMOs, I guess I'd like you to go into the ways in which GMOs somehow help the environment, like which?
Of course. Okay, so there are actually a lot of potential for GMOs to be environmental friendly because the global environmental impacts of biocrops have been for 70 years of adoption, show the technology